Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. This is being recorded. I am Kendra Cruz. I am a community health worker student with Pima Community College, and this is my capstone project. I've chosen to present on borderline personality disorder. If you want to go to the next slide. So what I'm going to go over is defining what a borderline personality disorder is. I'm going to talk about some treatment modalities that are available, barriers to care, what remission looks like, what current available resources that I find helpful. I'm going to talk a little bit about my own journey with my personality disorder, and then my plan to make things better for everyone else. Next slide. So borderline personality disorder is it's a mood disorder, and it's characterized with 9 symptoms. You have to have 5 of the 9 symptoms to qualify for a clinical diagnosis. So that means there is a combination of 256 different symptoms that people can have. They will start with like the impulsive behaviors. People with BPD generally, they tend to be addicts. They're impulsive with risky behaviors. They gamble, spend money. They also feel chronic emptiness. I describe this as you could spend 12 hours with your family, and then you can go home and you feel like you're completely alone. So it's feeling alone, even though you have a support system or you have people around me. There's intense moods. Everyone with BPD has a higher baseline for how they feel their feelings. So anger is rage, happiness is joy, sadness could make them feel suicidal. They have unstable relationships. It's generally characterized by idolizing someone and then devaluing them. This could be with coworkers, their families, romantic partners, their children. They tend to have, borderlines tend to have self-harm behaviors or suicidal ideations. A lot of borderlines tend to be cutters. And then I'm sorry. And then like constant mood swings. Sorry, just give me 1 second. I can't see the bottom of the. Can you zoom out on the PowerPoint a little bit?
I don't think I can zoom out.
Okay. That's okay. So they have a fear of real or perceived abandonment. So they've generally experienced some type of abandonment early in life. And then they feel it, maybe everyone else might leave. They have an unstable self-image. They deal with a lot of like not knowing who they are, mirroring their partners or their friends' likes and dislikes. They have explosive anger, extreme rage episodes. And then there's the paranoia or disassociation that generally they'll just like completely disconnect from a lot of things, or it can also seem like a psychosis that they might be in. Next slide, please. Oh, well, I do want to touch on how you get BPD, you're not born with it. People with personality disorders are generally born emotionally sensitive, and they've either experienced a lot of invalidation, extreme trauma, also having undiagnosed ADHD and autism can cause BPD. The next page is about available treatment modalities. So this is I'm just going to go over them briefly. Some of these I don't know very much about because I didn't know that they existed until October, which is a a big barrier, which we'll talk about later on. The first one is dialectical behavior therapy. This is a skills-based manual training or therapy where it goes over DBT goes over mindfulness skills, distress intolerance, which will help you get out of crisis mode or survival mode, help you manage in crisis times. There is emotional regulation, which teaches you all about feelings, when they're justified, when they're not, how to change a feeling that you don't want to feel. And then there's interpersonal skills, which teach you how to have conversations with people, how to work more effectively with people, how to get your needs met, make sure that you're respecting yourself and others during conversations. Schemia-based therapy is these are all psychotherapy. SFT is it helps with deep-seated emotional patterns that are formed by not having your needs met in early childhood. And it combines cognitive behavior therapy, attachment theory therapy, and other approaches that help people change their behaviors. It is pretty intensive. It also has a manual. And then there's mentalization therapy. This helps people understand and interpret their own thoughts and feelings and those of others. It focuses on mentalization or identifying different mental states that help regulate your emotions, relationships, and impulsivity. And then there's transference-focused psychotherapy. This helps people understand and improve their relationships. It focuses on patterns that show up in like a therapist-client relationship. It helps explore how they see themselves. It's very structured. The beginning process includes an assessment. There's a contract between the client and therapist. There's interviews with the client's family, if it's indicated, and then several interviews with the client themselves. And then the modalities without manuals, there's the good psychiatric management. These ones are not as intensive or as structured. So with the GPM, they provide education about BPD. They provide emotional support and skills to improve relationship and crisis management. And it's a good alternative because it's not as intensive. And then there's the structured clinical management. This one, it gives regular support through consistent appointments, education, problem-solving skills, crisis planning, and it addresses emotional regulation problems. It's less intensive and more available in general mental health services. And then there's the support psychotherapy, which is pretty much like talk therapy. It's not as structured. And then there's medications. You can treat some of the symptoms like irritability, mood swings, anxiety with various other types of medications. However, you cannot medicate a personality disorder. There's nothing approved specifically for borderline personality disorder. Next slide. So the barriers to care, there's a lot of them. The biggest one for me, I've noticed, is lack of trained professionals. There's discrimination for borderlines. They're generally spoken about as hard to deal with clients. There's a lot of misdiagnosis. There's just a lot of symptoms overlap with PTSD, bipolar, autism, ADHD, and other personality disorders. Adding in additional neurodivergent and comorbidities is a barrier. Community mental health agencies do not take private insurance. There's a lot of lack of empathy and willingness to meet clients where they are. DBT is the gold standard for treatment for BPD, but it doesn't work for everyone, and it's mostly offered in groups. And most certified DBT therapists do not take insurance. There is a lack of understanding about what a BPD diagnosis is. There's lack of education about what it means to have the diagnosis. There's not a lot of wide known resources, and workbooks are not covered by insurance, and therapy offices typically cannot assume the cost. The DBT manual is about $40 if you buy it on Amazon. Next slide. These are some available resources that I find really helpful. The only one that I knew about prior to starting this project, or prior to April, was vocational rehabilitation and Psychology Today. Psychology Today, you can find a psychiatrist and a therapist. Vocational rehab, since there's a lot of barriers for being a borderline and working, they can help with reasonable accommodations, accommodations with going back to school, things like that. And then I attended a seminar in October on the transference focused therapy. And one of the presenters had made a joke that there's this website, borderlinepersonalitydisorder.org, and borderlines don't even know about it. That was the first time I heard about this, and it has so much information that would have been very helpful to me. And then emotionsmatterbpd.org is a great resource for everyone, or for people in remission, or just to even for family support. They have peer support group sessions available on there. And then next slide, please. So the goal is to reach remission from doing all the different types of therapies or doing therapy in general. Remission is a thing which I didn't know for a really long time. So it's defined as a significant reduction in symptoms over time. And since BPD is a chronic mental health condition and it doesn't go away, the symptoms only decrease to the point where a person no longer meets diagnostic criteria, and then it becomes a historical diagnosis. And then remission can occur on a person maturing, so they usually decrease naturally in a person's 30s or 40s, but not always. Therapy is the most effective way to reduce symptoms because you can build skills that you need to have a better life and improve a relationship. Next slide. So as I mentioned, I have BPD, and I also have a lot of other diagnoses. So I also am on the spectrum, considered high functioning. I have ADD, which is attention deficit disorder. I have complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which is not an official diagnosis in the DCM manual. So the codes I've listed are for regular PTSD. And then I also have a generalized anxiety disorder. So one thing that my DBT therapist always told me was that this was done to me and it wasn't my fault. So based on everything that I've figured out in my journey to healing is I was born emotionally sensitive. I also had undiagnosed ADD and autism, and then I experienced a lot of trauma as a child. I had 33 traumatic events before I turned 18. So I've been through a lot, I've endured a lot, and I've done a lot of work on myself to reach the point where I'm generally only showing about 2 symptoms. Sometimes I add a third in there if I'm having a real rough day. But I am a borderline, but I am also a mom. I am a person. I'm a friend. I'm a colleague. I'm a sewist, and I'm a poet. And I define myself as a fighter, a survivor. I'm brave, strong, resilient. I'm finally happy. I'm whole and I'm alive. So I, as long as I can remember, I've been a borderline. I've had the symptoms. As a teenager, well, when I was 13, I was diagnosed with bipolar, which was a misdiagnosis, and then I spent years, about 4 years, in with a psychiatrist that gave me a lot of medications, and nothing helped. Some kind of pushed me over the edge. Between 13 and 17, I attempted suicide 8 times, and I never got any inpatient help, which I thought would have been beneficial. Also, I was misdiagnosed, and they knew I was misdiagnosed because in the early 2000s you couldn't diagnose an adolescent or a teenager with a personality disorder because the thought was a person's personality is still developing, therefore it can't actually have a disorder yet. Had they given me the actual treatment that they knew I needed back then, it would have changed a lot. Um, so I stopped actively trying to commit suicide at 17. However, I had suicidal ideations up until September of 2023. And this video here is from the day I realized I had a life worth living, which is the motto of DBT, is to create a life experienced as worth living. I was having a really rough day. My son, who is also impulsive, went outside in the fall in Michigan in a diaper and no shoes, and was out there playing with the dog while I was switching the laundry around. And I just looked up and I was like, I can't believe this. And then I thought, man, this is really a life worth living. Um, and so I grabbed my phone and I took a picture of it because I have an iPhone. It became a live photo. So, and when I transferred it, you can also see the video. Um, so that is a very brief, my story, very briefly. You want to go to the next slide? So my thought in all of this was it shouldn't have to be this hard. I tried to find DBT after doing talk therapy for several years, and I didn't want to do it in a group setting. I just didn't want to be in a room full of other people. Didn't have like the capacity to be able to handle that. I did attempt group DBT. I made it through one session. It was overstimulating, and I couldn't handle it. So then I started digging and looking. I called about 50 different offices before I found one that would meet me where I'm at or where I was. She offered DBT one-on-one with a manual the way I wanted it. And she gave me control of how we did things. When we were nearing the end of DBT, I'm like, what do I do from here? Like, where do I go? And she's like, well, you can start DBT over and then you just live your life. And then I just felt like that wasn't enough support because I'm going to have this and I don't want to end up back here and I don't want to have to like keep doing all of this stuff. So I started thinking like, what would be helpful? So I realized, but there are other options. Next slide. So my plan is to create a center called Cherry Path Recovery. And it's going to be an inclusive center for borderline where they can receive wraparound services and long-term support. I came up with a mission and a vision. My mission is to help persons living with borderline personality disorder achieve peace and wholeness within themselves. And my vision is to create an inclusive, validating, accepting, and affirming therapeutic center exclusively for persons living with personality disorder. and this is how I'm going to do it. Next slide. So the services that we're going to provide will start with a comprehensive intake. We'll do assessments, make sure they have the proper diagnosis. We will help with therapist matching and therapy matching. So making sure that they are connected to the correct modality that's going to be most beneficial for them. We're going to offer case management services. There'll be personal development, employment opportunities like within the center, and then job search support and referrals to wherever they need to go. We're going to offer psychiatric services, which are going to be comprehensive evaluations that they'll need for any other type of services. Make sure we catch any other neurodivergence where we can, and medications if it's indicated. And then the therapy modalities. So each therapy will be offered virtual and in person. We're going to have individual and group settings because some people thrive differently. Each therapist will be trained in multiple modalities that we talked about, that I talked about early on. I have a couple other that I've kind of picked from my own therapies. Internal family systems I found is very helpful for identity disturbance and figuring out who you are. And then the care plans and the therapies will be tailored to best meet the client where they are. That is, meeting people where they are is so important in mental health. So I'm really going to drive that home. I like to use the term cherry picking when it comes to therapy, because it's not possible for one modality to be perfect, but you can grab from other types of therapies because there's so many of them to build what a person needs to get where they need to be. And then we're going to offer extra support. So there'll be drop-in skills groups, peer support, on-call therapists, which is not really a thing anymore, but is so important, I think, for borderlines to not have to call crisis lines or end up on holds for temporary feelings. And then all manuals and materials will be covered at no cost or provided at no cost. Next slide. So they go through all of this and then they're in remission. And so the next step for them would be the Beyond Borderline Network. I said this to my current therapist a few weeks ago. Isn't that the point of this, to not have to come here twice a week? So the goal is to actually leave therapy and not have to move on to another therapist, to not have to start over, to not have to, visit crisis centers, to not have to go inpatient, to sustain remission long term. It generally people stay in remission for about 2 years and then a relapse happens. So this borderline, the network is going to help prevent that. Next slide. So how you become a member. So clients will be referred to the recovery network by their provider when they've met the following criteria. They have less than 4 symptoms for at least 6 months. They've completed 2 different therapy modalities, maintained sobriety for 6 months, no self-harm behaviors in 6 months, and no hospitalizations in a year. Next slide. So the services that the network will provide is a peer support sponsor. So it'll be kind of like having an AA or an NA sponsor. They'll specialize in using DBT skills and crisis skills. And then there's the actual crisis line. So it's going to be specific for borderlines. The responders will be trained with distress intolerance and mindfulness skills, mental health first aid, and they'll be certified in suicide prevention. They'll also be borderlines. I think it's so important to have a crisis line as a borderline, especially when you're dealing with suicidal ideation, because the likelihood of a borderline committing suicide in a 15-minute mood swing is very slim, but it could end up putting them on a 72-hour hold and impacting a lot of different things in their lives, like their jobs, their housing, those kinds of things. So I would like to avoid that by having the crisis line. And then there'll be drop-in therapy sessions and skills groups where they will be able, if they, need a therapist for an hour, they don't have a regular therapist, they don't have to start all over. And then the skills groups, if they want to, work on any of the skills. And next slide. And that's any questions? Alrighty, well, thank you for coming, and we'll go ahead and end here.
Kendra, I do apologize. For some reason, my internet did go out, so I had to reboot and come back in.
Oh, no, it's okay. Can you hear me okay now?
I did. So what I
Okay.
did see, you did a very wonderful job explaining um, borderline and the medication and the therapies. It kind of mixed together half, like I said, because my computer went out, but thought you did a wonderful job.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
You have a good one. We're going to go ahead and end now.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you. Great job.